My husband hid his mistress for 5 years. She turned out to be my younger sister. I found her lipstick in his car. I said nothing, just sent her one text. What happened next? Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I was the kind of woman who noticed everything. I caught the neighbor's kid stealing tomatoes from our garden. I noticed when my boss changed her perfume. I spotted a hairline crack in our kitchen ceiling 3 months before it became a leak. But I didn't notice my husband. Not really. Not the parts that mattered. His name is Daniel. We met in Austin when I was 26 and he was 31, at one of those rooftop parties where everyone is trying too hard to look like they're not trying. He brought me a drink I didn't ask for, a gin and tonic, and said, "You look like you'd rather be reading." He was right. I married him 4 years later. We had a good life. A house in the suburbs of Nashville with a wraparound porch, a golden retriever named Biscuit, date nights on Fridays, a shared calendar, shared mortgage, shared everything, or so I believed. My name is Claire Mercer, formerly Claire Hartwell. I'm 38 years old, and I'm telling you this story because I survived it, barely, and because someone out there needs to hear it. The first sign came in January 2 years before I found the lipstick. Daniel started going to the gym at 6 in the morning. That sounds innocent. It is innocent for most people. But Daniel had always hated mornings. He used to joke that his body didn't become functional until 9. So when the 5:45 a.m. alarm started, I asked him about it. He said his doctor told him morning cardio was better for his heart rate. I nodded. I made him coffee. I let it go. Then there were the work calls. Daniel is a project manager for a commercial construction company, the kind of job that occasionally demands late evenings, but not constantly. By spring, he was staying at the office 2 or 3 nights a week. He texted updates. Running late. Don't wait up. I cooked dinner anyway. I kept his plate warm. I was a good wife. I believed in being a good wife. My younger sister, Jade Hartwell, 29 years old, beautiful in the way that made strangers do double takes, had moved to Nashville 18 months earlier. She'd been living in Atlanta, chasing a graphic design career that kept almost working out. When she told me she'd found an apartment in East Nashville, I was overjoyed. I helped her move. I stocked her fridge. I introduced her to my friends. I brought her into my home, my life, my marriage. She came to Sunday dinners. She and Daniel got along well. Too well, I would later understand. At the time, I thought, this is what family looks like. I was proud of myself for building it. The second sign came in August. I found a receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket. Dry cleaning, nothing strange. But the timestamp was 7:14 p.m. on a Tuesday when he told me he was at a site walk in Murfreesboro until 8. Murfreesboro is 45 minutes away. The dry cleaner on the receipt was 6 blocks from our house. I held that little slip of paper for a long time. Then I told myself there was probably an explanation. Traffic, a change of plans, something. I put the receipt back. I smoothed the pocket flat. I didn't say a word. The third sign, the one that broke something open inside me, came on a Thursday in October. I had borrowed Daniel's car because mine was in the shop. It still smelled like him, cedar and laundry detergent. I found a good playlist, pulled out of the driveway, and drove to the grocery store. When I reached into the center console for a pen, I like to cross things off my list by hand, an old habit. My fingers closed around something small and cylindrical, a lipstick. I pulled it out slowly, the way you pull a splinter, knowing it's going to hurt. The color was a deep burgundy red. The brand was Charlotte Tilbury, a shade called Glastonbury. I knew that shade. I had complimented it once on someone's lips at a dinner in this very house. My hand stopped working for a moment. I sat in the parking lot of the Kroger on Charlotte Pike, and I turned that lipstick over and over in my fingers. I thought about all the mornings, all the late nights, all the dinners where Jade had laughed a little too freely at Daniel's jokes, where their eyes had met a half-second longer than necessary. I thought about how she always offered to help him clear the dishes, how she texted me asking if Daniel was okay whenever he seemed stressed. How would she even know he seemed stressed? I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I sat in that parking lot in my husband's car holding my sister's lipstick, and I felt something cold and very quiet settle over me like a sheet of glass. Then I took out my phone. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call a friend. I texted Jade. "Hey, you left something in Daniel's car. Want me to drop it off?" I pressed send. I put the lipstick in my purse, and I waited. Her reply came in 47 seconds. "What do you mean? I don't think I left anything." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then the message came. "Oh, wait. Was it a lip thing? I think I dropped it when we were helping you unpack those boxes from the attic. Remember? A few weeks ago." I read that message 4 times. Then I set my phone face down on the passenger seat and sat very still. The attic boxes. She was right that we'd gone through the attic together. That part was true. But Daniel hadn't been home that afternoon. He'd been at work. She'd been alone with me, not with him. And the attic is accessed from inside the house, not from the car. The car had been parked in the garage, locked as always, because Daniel is particular about his car. He doesn't let Biscuit in it. He'd never let anyone rummage in the console. She had lied, cleanly, quickly, with a detail already in place. That was when I understood that this was not a fling. Flings are panicked and sloppy. What she gave me in 47 seconds was a prepared answer. That takes rehearsal. That takes the two of them sitting somewhere, probably in that car in a parking lot much like this one, going over contingencies. What if she finds something? What do we say? 5 years. The thought landed in my chest like a stone dropped in water. Jade had moved to Nashville 18 months ago, but she'd visited before that. Holidays, summers. How many times had she sat across from me at my own table? How many times had I refilled her wine glass? I drove home on autopilot. I fed Biscuit. I started a load of laundry. I moved through the house like a ghost of my own routine, touching the surfaces of my life and finding them unfamiliar. Daniel came home at 6:30 that evening, on time, which felt almost insulting. He kissed me on the cheek. He asked what was for dinner. I said pasta. He said great. We sat across from each other at the table we'd chosen together at a flea market in Lifer's Fork, and I watched his face while he talked about a subcontractor problem at work, and I thought, how good are you at this? How long have you been this good? Very good, it turned out. 5 years good. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay on my side of the bed and took a full accounting. Not of the emotions. I was saving those for later, for a moment when I could afford to feel them. I took an accounting of the facts, the way a contractor surveys damage before drawing up an estimate. The house was in both our names. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, and a shared investment account that I had largely funded from my salary. I work as a senior compliance officer for a healthcare company, a job that pays well and requires, ironically, a deep sensitivity to rules being broken. We had no children. That was a mercy. We had 7 years of marriage and 14 years together, counting the time before the ring. And we had Jade, my sister. The person who had been in my hospital room when I had my appendix out in 2019. The person I called when I was scared, when I was lonely, when I needed someone who knew where I came from. The grief was enormous. I let myself feel it for exactly 1 hour, there in the dark, while Daniel slept 2 feet away from me. Then I stopped. I got up, went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table with a legal pad and a pen. I was not going to burn my life down in a fit of rage. I was not going to scream and throw things and give them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I am a compliance officer. I deal in documentation, process, and evidence. I was going to handle this the same way I handled everything that required precision. The first thing I wrote down was a single word: attorney. I needed to know exactly where I stood before I moved a single piece on this board. In Tennessee, adultery is considered a fault ground for divorce. That matters. I knew that much from a case I'd once worked adjacent to, but knowing it vaguely was not enough. I needed numbers. I needed to know what the house was worth, what was protected, what was exposed. The second thing I wrote: evidence. Jade's text was already saved, but a text about a lipstick wasn't enough. It was suggestive, not damning. If this ever went in front of a judge, and I was beginning to think it would, I needed more. Not because I doubted what I knew. I knew. But courts don't run on knowing. They run on proof. The third thing I wrote: finances. Quietly, gradually, I would begin to understand every account, every asset, every dollar that moved through our marriage. Not to steal, to protect what was already mine. I sat at that table until 2 a.m. When I went back to bed, Daniel was still asleep, one hand tucked under his pillow the way he always slept. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I turned off the light and I started planning. I called a divorce attorney the following Monday morning from my car, parked in the garage at my office building downtown. Her name was Patricia Okafor, a woman I'd heard mentioned at a professional conference 2 years earlier, in the context of someone describing her as the kind of lawyer that makes opposing counsel nervous. I had looked her up then, half idly, the way you save a doctor's name before you think you'll need it. Her office was on the 5th floor of a glass building near Vanderbilt. The consultation was 60 minutes. I brought the legal pad. I brought my most recent tax returns, printed quietly from our home office the previous Friday while Daniel was watching the game. I brought 3 months of bank statements I downloaded and transferred to a USB drive. I brought calm. Patricia Okafor was 53, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and asked questions the way a surgeon makes incisions. Precise, deliberate, without wasted motion. She explained Tennessee's equitable distribution laws. She explained what marital fault could and couldn't do in the courtroom. She explained that documentation was everything. When I left her office, I had a plan and a retainer agreement in my bag. I also had her cell phone number with a handwritten note that said, "Don't email anything you don't want discovered." Good advice. I was careful after that. Meticulous. I did not change my behavior at home in any way that Daniel would notice. I still made coffee. I still asked about his day. I still went to bed at 10 and let him kiss me goodnight, and every time he did, I felt something harden further inside me. Not hatred exactly, but resolve, calcifying layer by layer. At work, during lunch breaks, or in my car, I did my research. I subscribed under my work email to a cloud storage service. Everything I documented went there. I began photographing pages from our joint financial records. Not all at once, just a few at a time, spread over weeks, so that nothing looked disturbed. Then Jade called. It was a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the parking lot. I was in the kitchen when my phone lit up with her name. Daniel was in the living room. I felt my pulse jump once, sharply, and then settle. I answered. "Hey, you," she said, bright and easy. "Haven't heard from you in a minute. You okay?" "Busy week," I said. "You know how it is." Daniel said, "You've seemed a little stressed." A pause. "I hope everything's good between you two." The audacity of that sentence. I kept my voice warm. "Everything's fine, Jade. Just work stuff." She suggested we get brunch that weekend. I said yes. When I hung up, Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame. "Was that Jade?" he asked. "Mm-hmm. Everything okay?" I looked at him. "She wants to get brunch. Girl time." I smiled. "You don't mind, do you?" He said of course not. He looked very slightly relieved, and I filed that away. They were comparing notes. He had told her I seemed stressed. She had called to take my temperature. They were coordinating, which meant they were worried. Good. The following Saturday, I met Jade at a cafe in the Gulch. She wore a yellow dress and ordered avocado toast, and I sat across from her and thought about the lipstick in my purse. I'd kept it in a small Ziploc bag labeled with the date. She was warm. She was funny. She touched my hand when she asked if things with Daniel were really okay. I told her we were going through a quiet patch, but nothing serious. She nodded with such practiced sympathy that I almost admired it. But it was what happened after brunch that gave me the evidence I needed. I had, the week before, created a new email address. Something generic, unconnected to my name. I had also, on the advice of Patricia, hired a licensed private investigator named Marcus Webb. He was methodical and unremarkable looking, which was exactly the point. Marcus had been following Daniel's patterns for 8 days. On Monday of the following week, he sent me a secure link. Inside, 11 photographs. Daniel's car parked outside a townhouse in Germantown, a neighborhood 20 minutes from ours. The same car, same location, on 3 different dates. And then Daniel walking to the front door of that townhouse, Jade opening it, the door closing. The timestamps ran from 6:12 p.m. to 9:47 p.m. I sat in my car in the parking garage and I looked at every single photograph. There it was, not a suspicion, not a lipstick, not a text that could be explained away. 11 photographs and 217 minutes of documentation. I uploaded everything to the cloud. I forwarded the secure link to Patricia's encrypted inbox. Then I sat for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel. This was the point of no return. I thought about the girl I was at 26, at that rooftop party, who thought she noticed everything. She had no idea what noticing everything actually cost. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Wednesday morning in early December. By law, Daniel had to be formally served. I had arranged for the process server to come to his office, not our home. I wanted it to happen somewhere he couldn't control the environment, somewhere he would have to compose himself in front of colleagues and then drive home in silence with the paperwork on the passenger seat. I thought about that drive often. I hope it was very quiet. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed at 10:23 a.m. A text from Daniel. "Claire, we need to talk. Now." I replied, "I'm at work. Please contact my attorney." Then I blocked his number on my personal phone because Patricia had advised it and because I had no desire to absorb whatever was coming without a buffer. What came next was not from Daniel. It was from my mother. My mother, Sandra Hartwell, called me at 12:08 p.m. from her home in Knoxville. She'd clearly been crying or working herself up to it. "Claire, what on earth is happening? Daniel called me. He's devastated. He says you blindsided him. And Jade is very upset. Mom." I kept my voice level. "Did Daniel tell you why I filed?" Silence. "Did Jade tell you?" More silence. "Call me when they do," I said, and hung up. That evening, I went home to find Daniel's car in the driveway. I had expected this. I walked in, set my bag on the hook by the door, and stood in the kitchen while he came out of the living room. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red. Part of me registered that. The way you register rain against a window. Observable, not affecting. "You hired a PI," he said. "Yes. You've been planning this for weeks. Longer than that." He ran a hand through his hair. "Claire, I made a terrible mistake. I know that. I know it. But this, going to a lawyer, serving me at work, can we please just talk?" "I did talk, Daniel," I said, "to my attorney." He tried another angle then. He said that whatever was in those photographs could be explained. He said Jade had been going through something personal and he'd been trying to help her. He said he loved me. He said he had never stopped loving me. He said the word please 4 times in 6 minutes. I counted. When he was finished, I told him that all communication going forward would be through our attorneys. I told him he was welcome to stay in the house until the legal process determined otherwise, but that I would be sleeping in the guest room. And then I walked down the hallway and closed the door. 3 hours later, Jade arrived. I heard the doorbell, heard Daniel let her in, heard their voices lower to a murmur. Then she knocked on the guest room door. "Claire, please." I opened it. Jade looked like she'd also been crying, but on her it looked practiced, like she knew exactly how much was the right amount. She was wearing the yellow dress from the cafe. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know how this looks. I know that nothing I say is going to fix this right now. But I need you to know that you are my sister, and I love you, and I cannot bear the thought of—" "Jade," I said, "I have 11 photographs." She stopped. "Dates, times, a Germantown address. My attorney has copies. The court has copies. Whatever you were going to say next, it's already a matter of record." The warmth drained from her face so fast it was almost clinical to watch. What was left was something harder and colder, and for the first time I saw her clearly. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "You know that our family will never recover from this. Mom, the cousins, everyone. You'll be the one who blew it all up. Daniel and I, we weren't trying to hurt you." "You had 5 years," I said, "and a prepared alibi in 47 seconds. I stepped back from the doorway. "Good night, Jade." She left. Daniel left with her, which told me everything I needed to know about where his allegiance had resettled. After they were gone, I sat on the edge of the guest bed and let myself shake for a few minutes. Just shake. Not cry, not scream. Just let my body do what it needed to do. Biscuit came and put his head in my lap. Then I booked 4 days off work, packed a bag, and drove to a rental cottage near Lynchburg that I'd found online. 2 hours from Nashville, surrounded by trees, with no cell service unless you walked to the top of a small hill behind the property. I told my assistant I had a family matter. I told no one else. For 4 days I slept. I walked. I sat on the porch and watched the sky change. I let my mind go quiet. I ate simple things and read a novel I'd been putting off for 2 years. On the last morning, sitting on that porch with coffee going cold in my hands, I felt something return to me that I hadn't realized I'd lost. Clarity. I came back from Lynchburg on a Sunday evening. The house was quiet. Daniel had taken some clothes. I could tell by the gaps in the closet, but he'd left most things, which told me he still thought this was temporary, that he could wait me out. He didn't know me as well as he thought. On Monday morning, my inbox contained an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Can we meet? Just to talk. No lawyers." The email was unsigned, but the writing style was unmistakably Jade's. The same slight over-formality she always used when she was nervous. The same habit of starting sentences with, "I just want you to know." She said she understood I was angry. She said she wasn't making excuses. She said that what happened between her and Daniel was complicated, that feelings weren't something people chose, that she had spent years trying to fight it. She said she missed her sister. She said she was asking for 10 minutes, just 10, face to face, because she owed me that much. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to Patricia with a single line, "For the record." I did not reply to Jade. That same week, Daniel's attorney sent Patricia a proposal. It was, in Patricia's words, creative. It suggested that since the affair had been emotional in nature and not purely physical, which the photos did not technically prove inside the home, the fault grounds might be contested. It floated the idea of mediation. It suggested that given my income relative to Daniel's, spousal support might actually run in his direction. I remember reading that last part and feeling something almost like amusement. Patricia was not amused. She was precise. She responded with a counterfiling that included the PI report in full, the timeline of documented absences cross-referenced with our financial records, and a note that we would be requesting full discovery on Daniel's phone records. The emotional nature argument died quickly. But what I remember most from that week wasn't the legal maneuvering. It was a Tuesday afternoon in a restaurant booth in Midtown. Her name was Renata. I had known her for 4 years. We'd met through a professional women's group I attended sporadically, the kind of group where you have good intentions about going every month and then life happens. Renata was a family law mediator, which meant she understood what I was walking through without needing it explained. She had also, though I didn't know it until she told me over our second glass of iced tea, been through something similar. Not a sister, a best friend. She sat across from me in that booth and she said, "The hardest part isn't the betrayal. The hardest part is the grief of the person you thought you knew, because they don't exist anymore, and you have to mourn someone who's still walking around." I held on to that sentence for a long time. Renata came with me to Patricia's office the following week, not in any official capacity, just as a steady presence in the waiting room who handed me coffee when I came out and didn't ask how it went unless I started talking first. She introduced me to 2 other women in her circle, Kelly, a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma, and Doris, a financial advisor who helped women in divorce proceedings understand their assets independently. Within 3 weeks, I had a therapist, a financial advisor, and a friend who had been where I was standing. I also had something else: information. Doris, reviewing the documents I brought her, found something Patricia and I had not yet flagged: a savings account that Daniel had opened 5 years ago, right around the time she noted without drama that the gym habits apparently began, that was registered in his name alone and funded by small, regular transfers from our joint account. $200 here, $150 there. Over 5 years, it added up to just over $22,000. He had been building a private reserve, a cushion, enough to move on. I sat with that number in my apartment. I had moved out of the family home by then into a 2-bedroom rental in Germantown, a neighborhood I chose with full awareness of its significance, and I let the full architecture of the deception show itself. This was not passion. This was not weakness or a moment that spiraled. This had been constructed, carefully, over years. Daniel and Jade had built a future. While I was warm and trusting and refilling her wine glass, they were planning. Understanding that didn't make me angrier. It made me very, very calm, because I was planning too, and I had started later than them, but I was going to finish first. They came together. That was the part I hadn't expected. It was a Saturday in late January. I was in my new apartment, still sparsely furnished, still smelling faintly of fresh paint and the scented candle I'd bought to cover it. When the buzzer sounded, I looked at the intercom screen and saw both of them standing at the front entrance. Daniel in his good coat, Jade with her hair down, the way she wore it when she was trying to look softer. I could have not buzzed them up. I buzzed them up. I want to be honest about that. Not because it was the smart move, Patricia would have had thoughts, but because I was ready. Because after months of processing, documenting, and choosing every word through an attorney, I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to be in a room with them and feel what I felt, and know that what I felt wasn't going to destroy me. They came in. I offered them nothing. No coffee, no seats gestured toward. I stood near the window. They stood near the door. Daniel spoke first. He said they had talked, the two of them, and they had decided they weren't handling this right. He said they had both been cowardly and selfish, and that they owed me a real conversation, face to face, without attorneys in the middle. He said he didn't want to fight over money and property. He said he wanted to end this with dignity, on both sides, and that meant Claire, me, needed to consider whether continuing to escalate was actually helping anyone. The word escalate. As if the divorce proceedings I had filed were the aggression. Then Jade spoke. She said she knew she had no right to ask anything of me. She said that was exactly why she was asking. She said that our family, our mother, our aunt, our cousins in Atlanta were being torn apart by this, and that I had the power to choose a different path. She said that no matter what happened between her and Daniel, she and I were blood. She said she had always loved me. She said she still loved me. She said she would spend the rest of her life making it right if I would just agree to step back from the adversarial approach and find a way through this that didn't destroy everyone. She had tears in her eyes. They were real tears. I believe that. But tears aren't innocence. They're not even remorse, necessarily. Sometimes they're just feelings about consequences. I let her finish. I let the silence sit. Then I looked at both of them. Really looked, unhurriedly, the way you look at something you're seeing clearly for the first time. And I said, "You came here to ask me to go easier on you. And you dressed it up in the language of family and dignity because you know that's the thing most likely to work on me." I paused. "It's a good strategy. You know me well." Daniel opened his mouth. I held up one hand. "Daniel, you built a secret savings account. Over 5 years, while I paid the majority of our household expenses." I looked at Jade, and you called me from his arms to ask if I was stressed. I said it quietly. "I'm not escalating. I'm accounting." Jade's expression changed. The warmth slipped. What showed underneath was something more honest, frustration, calculation, and, very briefly, contempt. She caught it quickly, but not quickly enough. "You're going to end up alone," she said. "You know that? You're going to win everything on paper and have nothing. We were going to tell you. Eventually. We just needed time." 5 years wasn't enough time, Daniel cut in. His voice had an edge now. "The attorney fees alone are going to cost you more than you'll recover in the settlement. Think about that. Think about what you're spending every month to prove a point." "I'm not proving a point," I said. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." They left. Daniel slammed the door, not dramatically, just enough to register. Jade didn't look at me as she passed. When they were gone, I sat on the floor of my almost empty living room with my back against the couch, and I was afraid. There's no sense in pretending otherwise. What Jade said about being alone, it landed. Not because she was right, but because it touched the thing I was already scared of. The long, quiet evenings, the strange sideways grief of eating dinner alone in an apartment that still smelled like paint. But I sat with the fear, and I noticed something. It wasn't stopping me. If anything, every time it surfaced, it sharpened my focus. Fear, for me, had always been information. It said, pay attention. It said, this matters. It said, don't stop now. I picked up my phone and called Renata. She answered on the second ring. They came, I said. I figured they would, she said. How do you feel? Scared, I said, and completely sure. She was quiet for a moment. That's exactly where you should be. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in February in a conference room on the 3rd floor of Patricia's building. Both sides would be present. Daniel, his attorney, a man named Greg Falk who wore expensive ties and spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to making unreasonable positions sound reasonable. Patricia, composed and precise, a court reporter in the corner with her machine, and me in a gray blazer I had bought specifically for this occasion because I believed in dressing for what you were about to do. Jade had also been subpoenaed. She arrived separately with her own attorney, a younger man clearly hired quickly, and she sat at the far end of the table and did not look at me when she came in. I had arrived 20 minutes early. I wanted to be seated when they walked in. I wanted them to enter a room I was already occupying. Patricia had thought this was unnecessary. I thought it was essential. There is a difference between being present and being established, and I intended to be the latter. I arranged my documents. I folded my hands. When Daniel came through the door and saw me sitting there, already still, already ready, something moved across his face that I recognized. He had expected me to look diminished. I did not look diminished. The discovery process had yielded more than I expected. Patricia's request for Daniel's phone records had been processed 3 weeks earlier. What they showed, when overlaid with my PI's documentation, was a communication pattern that demolished the emotional but not physical argument his attorney had floated. 112 text exchanges in a single month, many after 11 p.m., several from locations that could be GPS mapped to the townhouse in Germantown. The phone company logs were impartial. They did not care about anyone's feelings. Additionally, Doris's review of the financial records had surfaced the full scope of the private savings account. $22,400 accumulated over 5 years, funded from a joint account that I had contributed to at a higher rate than Daniel throughout our marriage. 3 transactions from that account had occurred within 2 days of my filing the petition. The money had been moved. Patricia had filed a motion to freeze those assets pending settlement. The court had granted it. Daniel's attorney had argued this was overreach. The judge had disagreed. So by the time we sat down in that conference room, the landscape had already shifted considerably. Falk knew it. Daniel knew it from the way he sat, pulled slightly inward, shoulders forward. Jade's new attorney looked like he was reading the room and not enjoying what he found. Patricia was methodical. She walked through the timeline first, each documented absence, cross-referenced with phone records and PI timestamps. She asked Daniel, under oath, to explain each date. He did, poorly. He contradicted himself twice in the first hour, saying he'd been at a work site in one breath, and then, when presented with a phone record placing him in Germantown, adjusting his answer to something vague about stopping by a friend's place. "Which friend?" Patricia asked. He hesitated. "Mr. Mercer," she said pleasantly, "I'd like to remind you that you're under oath." He looked at his attorney. Falk gave a small, controlled nod that meant answer the question. "Jade," he said. "Jade Hartwell," Patricia said. "Your wife's sister." "Yes. And during these visits to Miss Hartwell's residence, what was the nature of your relationship?" A pause that lasted too long. "We were close," he said finally. "Close," Patricia repeated, with no inflection whatsoever. She moved to the financial evidence next, the account, the transfers, the 3 transactions post-filing. Daniel's composure, already strained, began to show visible cracks. His jaw tightened. He looked at the table. At one point, Falk placed a steadying hand briefly on Daniel's forearm. A small gesture, barely visible, but I caught it. It was the gesture of an attorney managing a client who was about to say something inadvisable. Daniel pressed his lips together and said nothing, which was, for him, the smartest decision he had made in that room all morning. But it was Jade's portion of the deposition that I will never forget. She had prepared. I could see it. The careful, even breathing, the practiced expressions. She decided she was going to present herself as someone who had made a mistake and was dealing with it honestly. She answered the first several questions cleanly. Then Patricia asked about the text message. She pulled it up on a printed exhibit, my text from the parking lot and Jade's reply. She read Jade's response aloud. "Oh, wait. Was it a lip thing? I think I dropped it when we were helping you unpack those boxes from the attic." "Miss Hartwell," Patricia said, "were you, in fact, in the attic of the Mercer residence with Daniel Mercer present on the date you referenced?" "No," Jade said. "Claire was there. Just Claire and me." "So Daniel Mercer was not present?" "No." "Then how would the lipstick have ended up in Daniel Mercer's car?" A pause. I could have left it another time." "Can you identify a specific time when you were in Daniel Mercer's vehicle?" The pause this time was longer. Her attorney leaned over and murmured something. She straightened. "I may have been in the car on a different occasion," she said. "A social occasion? A family gathering? Something like that." "Miss Hartwell," Patricia said, still pleasant, "are you aware that the lipstick in question, Charlotte Tilbury Shade Glastonbury, was purchased online by you, according to records my client obtained, and delivered to your East Nashville address, and that the order date can be cross-referenced with the timeline of your relationship with Mr. Mercer?" Jade looked at the table. "Yes or no?" Patricia said quietly. "Are you aware of that?" "Yes." The room was very quiet. I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I looked at my sister, and she would not look at me. I had imagined this moment many times over the preceding months. In the rental cottage near Lynchburg, in the parking garage at work, lying awake at 2 a.m. in the guest room of what had once been my home. In some of those imagined versions, I had felt triumph. In others, grief. What I actually felt, sitting in that conference room with the court reporter's machine ticking softly in the corner, was something quieter than either. It was the feeling of a long equation finally balancing, of a truth that had existed for 5 years being written at last into a document that no one could revise. Beside her, her young attorney was writing something on his notepad with great focus, the way people write when they are trying to appear occupied rather than alarmed. Daniel's attorney called for a 5-minute break. In the hallway, I could hear voices, low, urgent, the sound of a strategy being rapidly revised. Patricia leaned toward me and said quietly, "They're going to want to settle." I nodded. "I know. Do you want to?" I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "On my terms," I said. "Yes." The settlement negotiations lasted 6 weeks. Falk tried, in those 6 weeks, everything available to him within the rules of professional conduct. He contested the valuation of the house. He argued that the private savings account represented Daniel's premarital intentions, a claim so thin that Patricia didn't bother to rebut it at length, simply submitted the account's opening date against our marriage certificate. He suggested that my relocation to a rental in Germantown represented a voluntary reduction of my claim to the marital home. Patricia submitted the timeline of events that had precipitated the relocation. The judge read it. At one point, Falk called Patricia directly to ask whether I would consider dropping the fault grounds in exchange for a more expedient process. He framed it as a kindness: less time, less cost, less public record. Patricia called me, relayed the message, and waited. "No," I said. "That's what I thought," she said. Fault grounds remained. Tennessee courts can consider marital fault in equitable distribution, and Patricia intended to make full use of that consideration. There was one afternoon, a Wednesday in the 5th week, when Falk requested an in-person session between the parties without attorneys. Patricia declined on my behalf before I even had the chance to. But Daniel sent a personal email to my old address, the one I hadn't checked in months. I read it only because Renata happened to mention it had arrived. She'd seen it forwarded somewhere. And I opened it once, standing in my kitchen, and read it quickly the way you read a warning label. He said he was sorry, that the word felt inadequate, that he knew it did, that he had not intended for any of this to happen the way it did, that he hoped, one day, I might be able to think of the good years without them being entirely erased by the rest. I closed the email. I did not reply. Some apologies arrived too late to be received as anything other than noise. Sincere noise, perhaps, but noise nonetheless. What he had intended was not my concern anymore. What he had done was already a matter of public record. In the end, the settlement read as follows. The house went to me. We had purchased it together, but the down payment had come primarily from my savings. I had documentation of the wire transfer, and my income had covered the majority of the mortgage payments throughout the marriage. The valuation conducted by a court-appointed assessor put it at $412,000. The joint investment account was divided, but not equally. The court factored in the private savings account, the $20,400 that Daniel had accumulated by redirecting funds from our shared resources, and adjusted the split accordingly. I received 62% of the investment portfolio. The private savings account, all $22,400 of it, was returned to the marital estate and distributed as part of the settlement. Daniel got none of it. Spousal support? None, in either direction. My income was higher. His argument for support had never had any real footing. And after the fault finding, Falk didn't raise it again. Legal fees. Daniel's actions had necessitated the PI, the financial forensics, the discovery motions. The court ordered him to contribute to my legal costs. Not all of them. Enough. I signed the final paperwork on a Friday afternoon in late March. Patricia walked me out of the building into a gray, cold day, and we stood on the sidewalk and she shook my hand. It wasn't a celebrating kind of handshake. It was the kind that says, "You did the work, you got the result." Biscuit was with me in the car. I had kept the dog. Daniel hadn't fought me on that. There are some battles even guilty men know not to pick. I sat in the car for a few minutes before driving, not from emotion exactly, from a kind of stillness that comes after something long and demanding is finally done. I thought about the parking lot at the Kroger on Charlotte Pike. I thought about sitting in that car, holding a lipstick, turning it over in my fingers, making the decision not to scream. That decision, made in a grocery store parking lot on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, had changed the shape of everything that followed. As for Daniel, he moved into the townhouse in Germantown, the one in the PI's photographs, so they got what they had been building toward, a home together. The home that had been, for 5 years, a secret. Now it was just an address. Jade's attorney sent Patricia a letter after the settlement, a formal notification that Jade would not be pursuing any separate civil claims or countermeasures. She was done. The letter had the slightly deflated quality of a flag being lowered. My mother called me the day after I signed. She had, over the preceding months, gradually come to understand the full picture. Not from me, but from the pieces that became impossible to avoid as proceedings progressed. The conversation was quiet, not fully repaired, but honest. She said she didn't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything. We stayed on the phone for a while anyway, just breathing on the line, which felt like its own kind of progress. I drove home through downtown Nashville, past the building where Patricia's office was, past the cafe in the Gulch where I'd sat across from Jade in her yellow dress, past the exit that led to Germantown. I drove all the way home to my house, and I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment looking at the wraparound porch. Then I got out of the car. I let Biscuit out of the back seat. He ran toward the front door and sat there, tail working the air, waiting for me to catch up. I caught up. It took the better part of a year for the shape of my new life to feel real rather than provisional. The first few months in the house alone were strange. I'd wake up to a quiet that used to feel peaceful and now felt surgical. The absence of another person having weight and texture of its own. I let myself feel it. Kelly, my therapist, had been clear on this point. Feel the grief. Don't manage it. Don't schedule it. Just let it move through when it comes. So I did. I felt it in the kitchen, making coffee for one. I felt it when Biscuit wandered into the bedroom looking for someone who wasn't there. I felt it on Friday evenings, which had been date nights, which were now just evenings. And then, gradually, they became something else. Something mine. I repainted the living room in the spring, a deep sage green that I had always wanted and that Daniel had called too dark. I bought the couch I actually liked, not the one that had been a compromise. I started a garden on the side of the house. Tomatoes and herbs, the kind of project that asks for daily attention and gives it back threefold. I went back to the professional women's group more regularly now. I started reading more. I slept better than I had in years. Renata stayed in my life. Kelly stayed. Doris helped me refinance the house on my income alone, which turned out to be entirely feasible, and then helped me restructure my investments. At 38, my financial foundation was, for the first time, entirely my own. Work changed, too, in the way that big external upheavals sometimes clarify what you actually want. I had been comfortable in my compliance role, but comfortable had started to feel like a smaller word than it used to. A colleague at a conference mentioned an opening at a health policy nonprofit. Smaller salary, more complexity, more impact. I applied. I got it. The work was harder and more interesting, and I went home at the end of each day feeling used in the right way. By summer, when friends asked how I was doing, I told them the truth. Better. Not over it. Better. There's an important difference, and I had stopped pretending it wasn't there. And Renata introduced me at a dinner party in October to a man named Patrick, who was a civil engineer, funny in a quiet way, and who, on our second coffee, told me he was in no rush for anything and just liked talking to me. We kept talking. What it became, I'll keep to myself for now. But I'll say this. I knew what it felt like to share a life with someone who was secretly elsewhere. I had excellent calibration now. As for Daniel and Jade, the townhouse in Germantown lasted 14 months. I learned this not from tracking them. I wasn't tracking them, but from mutual acquaintances who mentioned things without realizing I was listening. Apparently, the thing that had seemed thrilling in secret turned out to be considerably more complicated in the open. Jade had expected, I think, a version of Daniel who was fully available, unencumbered, devoted, hers alone. What she got was a man who had lied to 2 women for 5 years and was now paying court-ordered legal fees while sleeping in a townhouse whose romantic associations had been thoroughly documented in court filings. Daniel was reportedly quieter than he used to be, tighter in the face, the way people get when they've made a calculation that didn't compute. Jade left first. I don't know the details and I don't need them. She moved back to Atlanta and, from what I understood, was rebuilding her design career there. The family situation was complicated. My mother spoke to her occasionally. I did not out of active hostility. I had finished with hostility when the settlement was signed, but because some distances, once measured, can't be pretended away. My mother and I talked more often than we had before any of this happened. The difficulty had, in some sideways way, cleared the air between us. She said to me once quietly that she had always thought Jade needed more watching and that she was sorry she hadn't said so. I told her it wasn't her job to have said so. We were figuring out what honesty between us looked like now that the usual subjects weren't available. By the time the first year had fully passed, I was sitting on my wraparound porch with coffee on a Sunday morning, watching the tomatoes redden, listening to the neighborhood start its day. Biscuit was asleep on the step below me. It was the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. And I thought, this is the life. Not the one I planned, not the one I would have chosen from the rooftop in Austin at 26. But mine. Honestly, finally, completely mine. That turned out to be more than enough. There's something they don't tell you about betrayal. It teaches you exactly who you are. I thought I was a woman who noticed everything. It turned out I noticed enough at the right moment to change the course of my life. What did I learn? Document. Stay calm. Know your worth before the courtroom does, and trust the cold, quiet voice that tells you something is wrong, because that voice is never wrong, only sometimes early. To anyone sitting with a suspicion they're afraid to confirm, you already know. The question is only what you'll do with what you know. What would you have done in my place? Leave your answer below. And if this story stayed with you, share it, subscribe, and thank you for listening to the end.